I think that it's important to talk about how we navigate conflict and how do we have like a posture of love throughout disagreements, and even ones that do just kind of like, we hear the saying, let's agree to disagree, but sometimes there's still that little funk that's there. And if we're being honest, so, what is a biblical way that we can really navigate loving each other well through conflict and disagreement?
Yeah. Thank you for that, Jennifer. You're right. I mean, even as an apologist, someone who loves to talk about the reasons for the Christian faith and to dialogue about those, so words are so essential to the apologist. Jesus talks about the fact that they will know you by the love that you have for one another. It's not by the arguments for the Christian faith, and it's not by the words that we use, but it's ultimately by, to your point, Jennifer, the unity and the love that we have for one another. That's the greatest apologetic, which I've talked about in another video. But you're right. We have these moments of conflict and disagreement. And I was particularly thinking about this in light of a recent Everyday Theology episode that we recorded, where we addressed the question of, is it loving to call someone by their preferred gender pronouns? Now, if you watch that, you'll find that there was a little bit of disagreement amongst our crew. But I think that what was most important was that we showed how we could disagree and love one another, but also that love was at the central component of how we chose to think about this issue. So the question is then, how do we maintain love through disagreement, whether it's through an issue as sort of sensitive as that one, or through a number of different types of disagreements, whether it's with family, whether it's with friends, or other church members. So let me give you a couple of thoughts here. One of the most important things about the Christian life is having balance. And one of those things has to do with, one of those components have to do with balancing our desire to be right with also being in right relationship with one another. And this goes back to Jennifer's point about being unified. Sometimes we can go so far in one direction, we can desire so staunchly to be right that we throw relationships to the side. And other times we desire so much to stay in relationship that we kind of throw truth to the side because we just don't want to lose that relationship. But the fact of the matter is, we're called as Christians to strike a good balance between the two. Consider Proverbs chapter 3, verses 3 through 4. It says, "Do not let mercy and truth leave you. Mercy and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and people." Notice what it does there. We have to not let both mercy, that's sort of the idea of being in right relationship with one another, and truth, these two should be part of everything that we do. And balancing those two things is important. But then it also says that if you do this, you will be seen as favorable, not only with God, but with other people. So this is something that is vitally important. And balancing the importance of relationship with the integrity of truth is one component in continuing to love through disagreements. Something else that we can consider is how we see one another, particularly in those moments of conflict and disagreement. And that's seeing each other as immaculate image bearers. Social scientists talk about this one idea called singular rigid identities, and it refers to seeing one another as one particular identity. And that's often what happens when we're in these moments of conflict and disagreement. Let's say, for example, that we're talking about politics, and I have one perspective, and someone else has a different perspective. In those moments, it's somewhat ordinary that we see the other person as the opposing view. But the fact of the matter is, we have identities, we have multiple identities that make up who we are. Sure, we have our political leanings. We also are mothers, our fathers, our writers, our Detroit Lions fans. We have all types of different identities that compose of who we are. And when we look at each other in just one way, particularly in a way when we're opposing someone else, that only fuels disagreement and brings it to a level of toxicity. Consider what God says in Genesis chapter 1, verses 27. It says, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them." This is the central sacred component. You see, we all have different sacred values that we hold dear, but it's not just about the sacred things that we hold, but the sacred way in which God made us, and He made us in His image. I love how C.S. Lewis puts it in his book, The Weight of Glory. He has this one section where he talks about the fact that there are no ordinary people. Now consider that. Sometimes, we talk about people in two different categories. We'll say, oh, look, there's this famous celebrity or the CEO of this incredible company. But then we'll say, oh, well, this is just Joe Schmo who works at the local grocery store or whatever. But C.S. Lewis says, no, that's not the right way to think of each other. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. He goes on to say, nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, those things that we often think last for lifetimes. He says, no, these are mortals, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals who you work with, who you marry, who you snub, who you joke with. And then he says there's two ways in which we can see one another, as immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. It's important that we think about that, particularly when we're in these tense moments of disagreement and conflict, because how we see each other ultimately impacts how we treat one another. And in those moments, will we see one another as immortal horrors or as God made us and intended us to be, everlasting splendors? Next, we have to have a posture of patience. In James chapter 1, verses 19, it says, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. Now think about those three things: swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. When we're in disagreement, the fact of the matter is those three things are often in reverse. You see, instead of being swift to hear, we're slow to actually understand someone's perspective and really care about it. Instead of being swift to hear, we're quick to speak and to show the superiority of our perspective and our viewpoint. When it talks about being slow to wrath, these things are ingredients that just complete a recipe for anger. So we need to have a posture of patience, particularly when we're in these conversations that can be inherently volatile or can cause some disagreement. Next, I would say this is probably my second favorite narrative in all of Scripture behind the Garden of Gethsemane, and this is Acts chapter 17, where Paul is addressing he's at Mars Hill. Sorry, let me start that part over. This is in Acts chapter 17, where Paul is at the Areopagus, and he has this big speech. Now, understand a little bit of the context. Paul has just escaped some possible persecution. He lands on the shores of Athens, and this is a culture that is completely different than what he's accustomed to, than what he's used to, and what his beliefs reflect. This is a culture that was steeped in idolatry. In fact, when you would come to the shore, there would be a 40-foot tall idol of the goddess Minerva that would greet you. There was idols replete throughout the whole land. And this isn't idols like, in our time when we talk about idols, we talk about our cell phones, all the things that distract us, our devices, money, success. All these things are idols of like the 21st century. But in those days, idols were literal, physical little gods and goddesses that they would have everywhere. And one commentator said that the Athenian culture was so steeped in idolatry that they surpassed all other countries and nations, and how much that they really dove into the idolatry there. So this is the culture with which Paul found himself in. Now, he could have gone there and said to himself, or said to them, listen, you guys are wrong here. Let me show you the truth. But no, what Paul did was he found a way to build a bridge. He ultimately wanted them to hear him. And to hear him, he knew that he would have to find a way to find some commonalities, some similarities right from the beginning. So he starts off his speech. He says, men of Athens, I see that you are very religious. Now, of course, I would love to think this was a little sarcasm on Paul's point here. Of course, they weren't religious in the same sense as him, but he said, hey, this is a way for me to build a bridge to them, an olive branch, if you would, right from the beginning. So then when I get to those points where we disagree, they'll be more apt to hear me. And this is something that's so important when we're in these moments of deep disagreement. A great friend of mine, Lisa Fields, of the Jude 3 Project, she says, to reach someone from the other side, we have to be willing to build a bridge. And that's oftentimes what we need to remember in these moments. Yes, we'll disagree. Yes, we'll have conflict. But look for opportunities to find commonalities so that when we disagree, we won't ultimately divide over those disagreements. Finally, love. Now, I've recorded another video about love being the ultimate apologetic for the Christian faith, and you can find that on the Everyday Theology channel. However, I love this quote by the late writer James Baldwin. He says, "Love takes off the mask that we fear we cannot live without and know we cannot live within." Let me read that again. Love takes off the mask that we fear we cannot live without and know we cannot live within. Now, what is James talking about there? He's saying that oftentimes we wear masks as a form of protection. He's saying that we fear we cannot live without them because these masks sort of protect us. They inundate us from people finding out maybe some things that we don't want them to know about us, that we're scared of how they might react if they knew this about us. So we have these masks that cover up certain aspects of our lives. But then he goes on to say, when we know we cannot live within them. Sometimes there's this inauthenticity that comes with having these masks. There's a desire for us to really show who we really are. I want you to know who Brandon is. But there's also a part of me that's worried that if you knew this, if you knew that about me, would you judge me in a certain way? And I think we all live within that tension. But James is saying here that love takes off these masks. So let me ask you, as Christians, are we loving each other? Are we loving other people in such a raw and revealing way that encourages them to take off the mask that they feel like they have to hide within? Are we loving them in a way where they know that they can be their authentic selves with us? You see, this is the type of love that Jesus showed on the cross. His love allowed for him to be denigrated and persecuted and had all types of things said about him, but it was love that proceeded from him, and it is love that should ultimately proceed from us. So remember, strike a good balance between right relationships and also the truth. See each other as immaculate image bearers. Have a posture of patience, particularly in these moments where conflict and disagreement arise. Look to build a bridge. Look for commonalities and similarities, and ultimately ground everything that you do in love.
Thank you for watching Everyday Theology. For more content like this, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel.